Right, for years we've all had it drilled into us to cut our cloth to measure. But here in Ireland, looking at 2026, that old advice is just completely falling apart.
Let's just jump straight into the reality on the ground. For decades, the logic was dead simple, right? If things get a bit tight, you just pull your horns in and spend a little less. You knuckle down, skipped a few nights out, and eventually the sums worked out. But that logic is totally colliding with where we are right now. We've got stagnant incomes sitting right next to these absolutely massive spikes in essential costs. Essential living expenses have literally sprinted past wages. So that old advice of just doing a better budget is, well, it's mathematically impossible now. The gap between what's coming in the door and what absolutely has to go out, it's gotten so wide that no amount of financial gymnastics is going to fix it.
So you might be wondering, why does it feel like even after you've cut back on absolutely everything, you're still feeling this massive squeeze? Well, we need to break down exactly why working families across the country feel so totally trapped at the end of the month. And to do that, we have to look at what they simply cannot cut.
Take a look at the makeup of a typical household income in Ireland today. It's wild. Once you actually pay for the roof over your head, keep the radiators on, and do the big shop in Dunnes or Tesco, your discretionary slice, that tiny sliver of freedom to actually live your life, is practically non-existent. See, cutting back used to work because we actually had flexibility. There was non-essential spending there that you could genuinely reduce. But today, the whole picture of our monthly outgoings looks drastically different.
Let's look at these totally inflexible essentials. Housing is obviously the biggest chunk. If you're renting, it's not like you can just ring up the landlord and negotiate your rent down for the month. Sure, you can't. And you can't just up sticks and move to a cheaper place because, let's be real, in the current housing market, those cheaper options literally do not exist. Then you've got electricity and heating. Yeah, you might turn the thermostat down a notch or throw on a jumper, but there's a hard limit. You can't freeze. Same story for the big shop. You can swap out the premium brands for own brands, absolutely, but you still have to put dinner on the table and prices are up across the board. And petrol? If you need the car to get to work or do the school run, you have to put juice in the motor. These are hard, inflexible costs that just swallow your wages before you even get a second to think about saving a few quid.
Right, so what happens when you actually follow that traditional advice and start cutting out the so-called extras? You know the drill, all those things everyone tells you to give up if you want to get ahead.
Here's exactly how it usually plays out. Step 1, you cancel the sports packages on the TV, you stop going out for a meal, maybe you bin the streaming services. Step 2, the washing machine packs it in and you delay replacing it, or you completely skip the summer holiday down the country or over to Spain. Now, at first the spending drops and you think, okay, the pressure's easing up a bit. But very, very quickly you hit step 3. You hit a total brick wall where there is zero fat left to trim. Absolutely none. You're left just staring at the bare essentials, and as we just saw, those essentials are not moving an inch.
And that leaves us exactly here, at zero. Zero flexibility and zero options left to cut. This is a massive, fundamental shift from how budgeting used to work. Back in the day, if you made sacrifices, you could create a little surplus, right? You could actually stick some money in the credit union. Now, for an awful lot of people, cutting back doesn't create savings at all. It just about keeps you out of the overdraft. These small, constant increases across housing, the electricity bill, the food, the petrol, they all add up to a massive hit. You simply cannot cut your way out of a mathematical deficit when you've hit absolute zero flexibility.
Now, what's incredibly striking here is the brutal flexibility divide this creates, because this doesn't hit everyone the same way. On one side, wealthier, higher-income households still have some financial buffers. They still have a bit of discretionary fat they can trim to absorb those higher costs without too much grief. But on the other side, the average lower and middle-income working family in Ireland has none of that. For them, any further cutting means cutting into basic, normal, everyday living. It is literally trying to squeeze blood from a stone. The gap between those who can absorb the shock and those who simply can't is stark.
But look, we can't just talk about the raw maths here without talking about the heavy mental cost this exacts on an Irish household. Because a spreadsheet never tells the full story, does it?
It is an exhausting psychological drain. It's that constant gnawing anxiety of opening up the banking app on your phone. It's the sheer fatigue of permanently doing mental gymnastics and making trade-offs while you're pushing a trolley down the aisles. It's the gut punch of having to say no to the kids for really basic things like a school trip or the GAA summer camp. And let's not forget the huge time cost too, spending your evenings hunting for yellow sticker deals just to shave a few euro off the weekly shop. People aren't looking for pure luxury, they just expect normal living. And when you are doing everything right, you're working your socks off, you're cutting back, but you're still just treading water, that loss of basic expectation is deeply demoralizing.
So, the absolute most crucial point to take away from this explainer so far is this: it is not your fault. If you are feeling this pinch, you have not failed at budgeting. This is fundamentally an issue of structural bottlenecks, not a failure of your personal discipline.
Look at this. Your monthly budget is actually being dictated by massive global forces long before you ever set foot in a shop. Things like disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz are keeping your energy and petrol prices sky high. Then you have our own total domestic housing disaster, which is locking you into immovable rent and mortgage burdens. And our limited public transport infrastructure means you're basically forced into paying those massive running costs for a car just to get to work. When essential costs rise this much at a systemic level, tweaking your personal budget is never, ever going to be enough to fix the problem.
And what's actually fascinating is that this isn't even a uniquely modern problem. Historically speaking, economists have seen this exact thing play out before, even in vastly different economic setups like 19th century German colonial possessions. Whenever the cost of essential living rose past a certain critical threshold, individual budgeting completely collapsed. It's a completely different context, but the exact same structural pressure. When the whole system around you makes the bare essentials too expensive, individual action hits a hard ceiling. The only real way forward in the future is through massive, collective, systemic policy changes around our housing supply, our energy policy, and our infrastructure.
I really want you to take this specific point away from today's explainer. If you're feeling the pinch right now, you are more than likely already doing everything you possibly can. You are budgeting, you're adjusting, you're cutting back. But individual action has a hard limit when the entire system is pushing back against you. So that feeling you have that despite doing everything perfectly right, it's just not enough, that feeling is incredibly valid. Because the old rules of budgeting simply do not apply to the structural reality we are living in today.
Which brings us to the ultimate question, doesn't it? If cutting back no longer works, and doing the right thing doesn't actually give you any financial relief, well, how does that change our entire relationship with work, with money, and with our future here in Ireland? If putting in a hard week's work doesn't guarantee a basic standard of living anymore, we are well past the point where downloading a new budgeting app is going to save us. We need systemic solutions. Thanks a million for joining me on this explainer, and I'll leave you to chew on that one.